Good afternoon and welcome to the Weekly Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Travis Fain, one of WRAL State House reporters.
And whew, a lot of stuff going on this week.
Yeah, I know we say it every week, but I mean, just to hit the highlights, got a federal court hearing on our abortion law that was amended while the federal
Judge was looking at it.
We had multiple LGBTQ bills moving this week. The medical marijuana bill appears to be on life support, and there's some maneuvering around that. The SBI director, his term ends today, except no, it doesn't. He's just going to keep on in that job, even though the governor has appointed a new SBI director. We had maybe the most veto overrides in North Carolina history in a day, plus 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases that came out of North Carolina. It's kind of no wonder the Speaker of the House can just have affairs with state employees and kind of we all move on. Who can focus on anything?
Right. No, it's crazy. So let's start off with today's abortion ruling from Judge Catherine Eagles. So if you've been following this, of course, they passed the law SB 20, and then they passed a batch of amendments to it, fixes to it, clarifications, they say. That was signed into law late yesterday by Governor Cooper. Now, on Wednesday, Catherine Eagles held the hearing on whether or not to put certain parts of this bill, on this new law, on pause. It goes into effect tomorrow. What she ruled today is basically the main things are not going to be paused. It's 12-week ban goes into effect. The 72-hour waiting period between in-person visits is in effect. The part of it that she put on hold had to do with some of the rules governing doctors and record keeping, I think, that she said could have been concerning, in terms of doctors being, if they were legal or not.
There were concerns that questions about this part of the law would keep people from getting any abortion, even quite early, or particularly quite early, in a pregnancy. So that has been blocked while this broader lawsuit, because she's still going to consider, the judges, whether or not this law overall is constitutional. But if you're not going to temporarily restrain it from being enforced, I mean, that is usually a pretty good indication of where a case is headed. And she's only going to temporarily restrain, enjoin that one part of it. So.
Right. And then also our 2 big Supreme Court decisions this week. One of them was Moore v. Harper. You might remember that one. That was the independent state legislature's theory. It was pretty firmly quashed by 6 judges. It was a bipartisan group that said, yeah, no, this doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the one that people were like, oh, it'll change democracy as we know it. So if you feel that way, then democracy has been saved. But in North Carolina, it's not really going to make a This was all about redistricting, right?
Right, and about bigger than redistricting, because whether or not state courts have any ability to rein in lawmakers when it comes to election law matters.
Right. Election law matters in congressional elections. So, right. I mean, just get nuance on top of nuance, but it's still a huge deal. And basically what the Supreme Court says, yeah, no, they can do that. State courts can do that. Legislatures can't just do whatever they want here, which was what Speaker of the House Tim Moore and other North Carolina Republicans were arguing. Except in North Carolina on redistricting, they can still pretty much do whatever they want, because the state Supreme Court, our state Supreme Court, which is Republican,
is in their camp. Yeah,
is in their camp. Says when it comes to redistricting, they can draw whatever they want. So we're still going to draw congressional maps, legislative maps that are going to look pretty heavily stilted toward Republicans for the 2024 elections. They will still have to, because of a separate Supreme Court case that kind of reaffirmed parts of the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act. They still will have to be careful how they do it when it comes to minority voters. Speaking of minority voters,
there's the other one, affirmative action, which was pretty much, if you haven't heard, pretty much thrown out.
Yeah, you can't use affirmative action. You can't use race as a kind of predominant factor in deciding whether or not to let someone into a university, which is obviously going to have pretty wide ramifications. You can ask people to write an essay about how their experience as a minority impacted them individually, and so I mean, there's a bit of a loophole there, but I don't know how big of a loophole that is. But this is going to change policies at UNC, Harvard. Those were the 2 big ones of the case. UNC, obviously, what we care about. And there was an interesting carve-out that the Supreme Court did for military academies. So Justice Ketanji Jackson wrote in her dissent on this case, well, I guess we can prepare black students for the bunkers, but not the boardroom. Because diversity apparently is important enough in the military to set this aside at military academies. I thought that is interesting.
Yep. Interesting stuff. So a couple of LGBTQ bills this week, like every other week lately, I guess. But the Trans Care Bill 808, House 808, that went to the governor, where it's likely to be vetoed. It would block not only surgery but also puberty blockers and hormone treatments. Doctors who violate it could lose their license. Some really, really tough testimony from all sorts of folks this week at different committee hearings.
Yeah, and it went to the governor ultimately on a party line vote. But I was in Senate Rules Monday night and was just really struck by, I mean, people were just begging lawmakers not to do this. There was one woman who had a transgender teenager who also spoke, and then she had like a special needs young kid in a stroller. And I mean, she was just so desperate for this not to pass, and it didn't change a single mind. And there were, there were some pretty impassioned pleas on the other side too. There were some parents who said, our teen transitioned, we think, too soon. It has broken up this family. I don't know much more about it than that. And it just, I don't know. We've talked about this before about how it's wild to me that people can beg you not to do something. People with lived experience can beg you not to do something, and then you do it anyway. And it just, not only do you do it anyway, but it changes not one mind.
Nope.
The process doesn't seem to change one mind.
Speaking of which, they also did the Parents' Bill of Rights this week in the Senate, well, the House and the Senate. So the Senate took up the House passed it Wednesday. The Senate took it up Thursday and sent it to the governor. And during that whole debate, Senator Lisa Grafstein, who is the only openly LGBTQ member of the Senate, just stood up and really just sort of dressed everyone down about what all these LGBTQ culture war bills were really amounting to. And I mean, it was really pretty remarkable speech. I mean, normally in the Senate, people tend to be very collegial, congenial, with each other. And she wasn't rude.
No.
But she was extremely blunt.
Yeah, she said power and strength are two different things. Weak people punch down. That's she also said that she sees a lot of discomfort in her colleagues when LGBTQ bills are discussed, when abortion bills are discussed. She sees people fidgeting, people leaving the room for the debate, tense looks on everybody's face, and she said, morph that into empathy. She said, take that discomfort. I think discomfort is a good thing. Turn it into empathy, which I thought was really interesting. Senator Lee, Senator Jim Perry, and Senator Sawry from Johnston County, they all responded to this. They said, so the bottom line on this bill, there's two things it does. One, if a kid at a school of any age wants to change pronouns, the educators have to tell the parents. The other thing is it says, okay, we can't have anything about gay marriage or just gender identity, all that stuff, not from kindergarten to fourth grade in the curriculum. If it comes up, you can address it. The teacher can answer a question, although, I mean, where the line is on that is...
Well, it's not currently in the curriculum anyway, but it does come up sometimes in classroom materials. And so, like for the books that a teacher will choose to read or something. So it's banned from all of that. So it's not technically a don't say gay bill like they had in Florida, but I mean, it's pretty close, And, it was interesting to hear Grafstein basically say that, this is an attempt to erase LGBTQ people, and it's not going to work. And Lee, for example, Senator Michael Lee stood up and said, "I respect you. This is not about not respecting." I think that's kind of the schizophrenic nature of this bill, because there's one part of it which is not teaching kids about sexuality too early that I think a lot of people agree with.
Right.
Our polling shows a lot of people agree with. The part of it about outing kids who are queer, outing kids who are trans, a lot of people don't agree with that. So, and they put those two things together in this bill.
Yeah, and I mean, what the Republicans were saying is it's about preserving the innocence of childhood, the part about kindergarten through fourth grade. And then Senator Amy Gailey stood up and defended the pronoun section. I mean, basically Republicans have said schools should not be keeping secrets from parents. And the argument for keeping that secret is, well, not every parent is accepting of these kids, and let's not put them in danger. And she said, well, if that's your argument, why do we tell them when a kid gets bad grades or when a kid's on drugs, pregnant?
Yeah.
If we think these parents are monsters and dangerous, it seems like we're not using that logic all across the board.
And she's right.
Yeah, she's got a point. But I mean, at the same time, we're also, I can see the argument on, well, you're trying to erase us. But by saying don't talk about us, you're saying we're bad. That gets soaked into kids at an early age. So. But it is on the governor's desk now?
It is
Yep.
on the governor's desk.
Senate Bill 49.
Yep. So there's two up there, and then medical marijuana. You wrote earlier, or was it late last week?
Last week,
Yeah, that it looked like it might be dead, but apparently Bill Rabin is bound and determined to resuscitate it. He stuck an amendment into a House bill that says it can't go into effect until the medical marijuana law is passed.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a bill that had a lot of health chairs on it in the House, although some of them, I believe, support his medical marijuana bill. It was more about sending the House a message. Hey, if you don't pass our bill, do medical marijuana. We're not doing some of yours. Here's a question. How is it that sports gambling was accepted by the House Republican caucus and medical marijuana was not? How is it that conservative Republicans in the House said everyone in the state who's over 18, I guess, can bet on their phone at any time on basically any sport? That's okay, but somebody with cancer should not smoke weed. I'm fascinated by one bill's ability to get out of the House caucus and the other bill's ability
If
not
I
to.
were cynical, which of course I'm not, if I were cynical, let's say it has to do with money.
Oh, money. I hadn't considered.
Yeah,
You might be on to something there.
A lot more money in gambling than medical marijuana. But I mean, I also, as we made this point last week, I think, the Freedom Caucus, the folks on the far right of the Republican Party, have been asked to give a lot this session. There has been a lot that they've had to give in on, and they may have simply. There's only so far you can twist somebody's arm before it just comes off, right?
Yeah, and of course we make decisions on where we are and aren't going to twist those arms and which arms we twist first. So.
Yep.
Reg reform, House Bill 600, that moved forward. The section that generated the most concern over water pollution was stripped out, but the Southern Environmental Law Center still has a lot of concerns about this bill, which is heading back to the House. 3 Senate Democrats voted for it, so it's got some bipartisan support.
I think part of that is because it does some things that farmers want. And so if you're in a district where ag is important, which is a lot of districts,
right?
You're going to want to support your farmers.
And I mean, it's something, I'm going off memory, always dangerous, but I think it's like 36 pages, and it's here, there, all over the place. Boy, these bills always make me nervous at this part of the session because there's so much going on, and so much of it generates headlines when you talk about abortion or LGBTQ bills. And it just save a little bit in your brain to pay attention to stuff like this, the Reg Reform Bill, H600.
Yeah, there's a lot that's not having to do with abortion or marijuana or LGBTQ kids that's happening too. And and maybe one could argue that perhaps that's the
budget being negotiated
right?
as we
behind
speak.
Closed doors, although not very quickly apparently.
I've got a piece coming out on Sunday y'all can look for about how much health policy is in that budget, the ability for Atrium down in Charlotte and UNC Health out of Chapel Hill to expand with antitrust protections. It's complicated. We don't have to get into it here, but that's one of the things. There are really generational things about how we go about North Carolina-ing that are in this state budget. So,
the Farm Bill was one of the veto overrides this week, and it has some changes in it that have to do with federal law and a federal ruling in terms of how wetlands are classified. So what the Farm Bill will do, according to some, is to allow millions of acres of what used to be considered wetlands to be developed. Now, if the folks who are the environmental folks say this could be a big problem, especially down at the coast, because a lot of those wetlands are sort of the catchment area for the extra water that you get during a hurricane, right? The flooding.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that a lot more acreage can be developed here and used by farmers. The question is whether or not it ever should have been considered a wetland to begin with. This is all part of the waters of the United States law. So it's like where state and federal enforcement meet is changing and opening up all these acres to development. But I mean, Jimmy Dixon, the House member from Sampson County, he said, I've had regulators on my friend's farm telling them that tire marks, well, that's a creek. That's because water flows through it into a waterway. So it's all about how adjacent waterways have to be before they're regulated like wetlands or waterways. But I mean, it's law now. And that Farm Bill also, that's another one of them grab bag bills. It also urges schools to have muscadine juice on hand.
At least it doesn't require it, though. That was the original bill, right?
Right. And of course it does a ton of other things. This is the one we talked a while back that has the, if you're a veterinarian, the vet board
has to give you a week's heads up before an inspection. Oh my gosh!
Has to give you, and if it's not a convenient time for you to be inspected, you can reschedule it at your at your choice.
And in fairness, we should note that the Senate Rules Chair is a veterinarian.
He is a veterinarian, huh?
Yes.
It's just weird how that lines up.
Charter schools moving this week. It's got one more vote in the House after passing the Senate yesterday. This is a bill that basically takes a lot of the regulatory guardrails off of charter schools. For example, even low performing charter schools would be able to grow faster without having to have state oversight. I think the big thing here is that it would allow counties to use taxpayer money for capital needs for charter schools. Right now, that's not how things work. Right now, charter schools have to supply their own their capital costs, right? The building, whatever. And then the state and the local LEA help to pay for the teachers, the operational costs. This will allow charters to come to the county board of education and say, hey, we need X number $1 million for this charter school.
I think it would actually be the county commissioners because they're the one with taxing authority.
Okay.
I'll stand to be corrected on that, but I believe that's the way it is, and it's their decision.
Yeah, but it would go. I mean, coming up in your tax bill.
Right. And I mean that's a shift because one of the arguments for charter schools at the beginning was they're going to have to handle their capital needs themselves, and this is a major erosion of that. There's also would be a preference for children to because you have to go through a lottery to get into a charter school if it's popular. This would give a preference if charter schools want to partnering preschools. So if your kid's in a certain preschool, you can send them to that charter school a little easier.
Jump the line a little bit.
Democrats tried to amend this bill to really more heavily regulate the charter school industry, and that was tabled. I mean, one of them, I'm coming to an ad soon near you, dealt with sex offenders and whether or not they could work in charter schools, and I don't know the exact rules there. But
another thing that the Democrats tried to do that was tabled was to ban for-profit charters. So, because there are operations around the U.S., for-profit operators that come in and run these schools. And so they tried to say that, these people could not go to your county and ask for money for their capital needs. That, as you said, did not make it.
Yeah, let's turn our attention back. 1 week ago, the Speaker of the House, or maybe it was 2 weeks at this point, it was unearthed that he had an affair with a woman named Jamie Lyles Lassiter, who's married to a guy named Scott Lassiter, and she works in a state job. And I did a piece that ran Monday, which seems like an age ago at this point. She got something like $50,000 in raises over the 3 years she was having this off-again, on-again affair with the Speaker. She was in that job well before then, though. The committee that approved those raises said the Speaker had nothing to do with it. Like the president of that committee says, look, I didn't even know they had an affair, that they were together, that there was any connection there. So, but it is, that's a lot of money that she got. And, we've talked before about some of the entanglements the Speaker of the House has been in. So that's still simmering in the background, but we just stopped talking about it this week. There may not be much further to go until the lawsuit against the Speaker on this continues. From what I understand, is the House Republican Caucus continues to support him.
In the meantime, Bob Schirmeyer is, this is, as you pointed out, is the end of his term is today. Chip Hawley has been tapped by Cooper as his successor, but needs to be confirmed, and the House and Senate have not even scheduled hearings to confirm him yet. Or Senate, sorry. So
neither one. He has to be confirmed by both. By
both
joint
of them.
resolution.
Okay. So joint resolutions. So anyway, so he said he had a verbal conversation with the AG's office.
I can actually go a little further than our notes here now. So Bob Schirmeyer remains the director. There's a part of state code that basically is a catch-all and says, look, if you just stay in your job until your appointment is confirmed. But it was real hard to get people to talk to me about it. Like I had to call the Speaker's office, the Pro Tem's office, the SBI, the Governor's office, the Attorney General's office, and then finally I had to say, I'm going to write a story that says, apparently none of y'all know. Guess who calls me? It's Bob Schirmeyer on my phone saying, no, we know. I'm still the director. And apparently
Don't make me write a story about you.
Apparently he ran this by the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office told him verbally that he could continue. The Attorney General's office won't confirm that to me. They say, oh, that's attorney-client privilege. But, I mean, look, the backstory here is Republicans want Bob Schirmeyer to stay in the job. They don't want the governor to name his appointment. There are hearings ongoing as to whether or not the Cooper administration tried to get Schirmeyer out early by saying, hey, we've been getting some calls that you're doing racist stuff. And that sounds like it's going to be a big thing. Why don't you just resign? The thing is, the Cooper administration did get calls from agents who said, hey, he's discriminating against us. So the question is, because this is an independent agency where the governor can only fire the director in like real specific problematic cases, whether or not the Cooper administration overstepped there. And there's some disagreement, and kind of while that is being discussed, it's possible that the legislature does some sort of code change that allows Schurmeyer to stay in the job. It's also possible that this all gets worked out, and Chip Hawley, who's the current state capitol police chief.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who was opposed to him. So.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's so much opposed to him as I believe they oppose this guy named Roy Cooper. Not fans of his. So we'll see. I don't know.
I do want to bring up the ABC omnibus because this always happens. Every session, we end up with this bill that's rolled out that is like the wish list of alcohol sales and beverage sales and et cetera. And this year's did not disappoint. It included Sunday sales and happy hours, which are kind of things that we've seen before, right? The idea to allow locals to choose to open ABC stores on Sundays if they want to, and on holidays except Christmas and Thanksgiving. But one thing that I loved in this was the space whiskey.
Space whiskey.
So what I understand from, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a distillery in Durham that is going to market whiskey that has gone up in a spaceship.
It's like a SpaceX, one of Elon Musk's rockets, and then aged for a year in space.
Aged for a year in space. So they're going to charge like $50,000 or something for this, right?
I've seen 50 and I've seen 75. And here's where tax law comes into effect.
Right.
So it's like a 30% excise tax on liquor.
Ooh.
So if it's a $50,000 bottle, that's $15,000 you got to pay in taxes. And so they don't want to do that. And Tim Moffitt, who's carried many alcohol bills over the years and is carrying this ABC omnibus, wants to say, all right, now it's just a flat 1,000 if you send it into orbit. That's the way the state
really?
code. Yeah, it says, all right, if you send liquor into orbit, then you only have to pay $1,000 per bottle tax.
I figured they would just put like a cap on it or something.
No, it's
no, that's too easy.
It's real specific. You have
My
to,
goodness.
You have to go to space. So I don't know. Do you have a sense, Laura, how that if that ABC package is a goer? I mean, it's kind of emerging late in the session.
It's emerging late in the session, and we've also still got medical marijuana out there. They just did gambling. They're talking about casinos. It's like,
Oh, we didn't even mention that. I mean, I guess we've talked about it before, but they're still kind of talking without having it written down in anything that I get to see about authorizing multiple casinos in the state, in poorer areas of the state. That you've heard us talk about that before. That kind of continues to be, well, maybe, I don't know. I mean, it seems to be getting less and less likely.
I'm just saying, if you want to run a sin bill these days, like, you're out of chips,
right?
Basically, pretty much. You know, some of these folks have done exactly all they're going to do. So, well, you know, I don't know. Maybe some of it will get through. I know they've been trying for a long time on some of this stuff. So wanted to mention real quickly, there was 6 overrides in one day. I think that is a record. I went back and looked, and I could find where they had done 5 before in a day. And that was back in Cooper's first term before they were able to break the supermajority.
Yeah, and it was, as we mentioned, the Farm Bill plus 2 bills that tinker with consumer finance issues, including raising some interest rates you can charge. A bill that allows the state to hold back sales tax revenue a small amount if a local government doesn't turn an audit in time. The bill that bans like woke investing, ESG investing with the state pension plan. And then Senate Bill 364 was the sixth one overridden. It bans public universities, state agencies from asking employees or prospective employees like about current social issues, their political opinions. I mean, it's another anti-woke bill. It's like, you know, don't make people tell you how diversity is good when they're applying for a job. So those are all into law over the governor's, and some of them got Democratic votes. And which is interesting, you know, as the governor comes into his last couple of years in office here. The Democratic, it's not a...
The blue wall is no longer a wall.
The blue wall is no longer, and it kind of was irrelevant because of the supermajorities in both
right.
chambers, but that's always something we do watch.
One thing to add that we should add is that they are off this coming week, so they will not be meeting at all. I was talking to one of the budget negotiators who said, maybe that will help. He said he's never seen them this much at loggerheads before.
Over the same thing for kind of weeks.
Yeah, for weeks. It's like, that's what he said. It's like one side goes in and puts down their list, and the other side goes in and puts down their list, and there are not even negotiations. It's just like we have to have this and we have to have this.
Yeah.
So they have not gotten to that moment yet where they are ready to negotiate. And so Senate Leader Phil Berger said on the floor yesterday he thinks July 24th, that week, is probably the earliest we would get for budget votes. I think that might end up being a little optimistic, but who knows? Maybe it's one of those things where when they just crack the dam, the rest of it will go quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I expect. It's just a matter of when we do crack that dam. I'll also note quickly, Congressman Dan Bishop was at the legislature Thursday. He visited, said he just had time during the congressional recess, was catching up with friends, says he has not made a decision yet on whether or not to run for attorney general. Told me that on Thursday. And then the last thing I've got is, remember that Green Party signature thing where the Green Party was trying to get on the ballot in 2022 and they hired a bunch of people to do signatures and there was question about whether there were a bunch of fake signatures? Well, one of the guys involved with that who was collecting signatures, organizing it, was named Sean Wilmoth, and he has now been one of several people charged with felonies
in Michigan
by the attorney general then. So honestly, Laura, if you'd asked me, when was that? When was that Green Party thing? I would have been like, it's like 4 or 5 years ago. It was last year.
Yeah.
It's like 1 year ago.
It's the time cycle these days.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that is it for us. We wish you all a very happy 4th of July and safe 4th of July. And we hope you will join us next week here for the wrap.
Next week or whenever we do it
Or again. Whenever we do it again here on the wrap. Thank you.